That's from the gist. Luke Watson, a research executive at Get Britain Out, was the guest on today's show. I'm really aware that quite often we'll have people from the Remain side or from the side of issues that we tend to agree with. Now, we're always trying to get people who we disagree with to try and get a different perspective on every issue that we like to discuss, but sometimes it can be a little difficult, and it's taken us quite a while to get a Brexiteer. But thankfully, Luke was really happy to chat to us, and we had a really interesting discussion about the internal politics of the Tory party over Brexit at the moment, the Chequers plan, and the potential for a no-deal Brexit. Before we get started, don't forget you can subscribe to us on Facebook and Twitter. You can follow us on iTunes. You can get our podcast on Spotify now. So here's Luke Watson. So Luke, thanks for agreeing to host me in the Get Britain Out offices for a little chat about Brexit.
Yeah, it's a pleasure for you to be here.
For a change, it's always nice to discuss something new, and everyone is definitely bored at this point of it. But
yeah, I think most of us are. It is dragging on a lot, but it's still not finished. So
get used to it. It's not going anywhere.
Yeah, exactly. It's going to be dominating political discourse for years to come. So.
Liam Fox said this week that he thinks it's about 60-40 for a no-deal Brexit.
Yep.
And in my mind, if Liam Fox is saying it's 60-40, it's probably something closer to 80-20. But that's just my personal thoughts. But how likely do you think we are to end up with a no-deal scenario?
I think its chances are quite high, especially since, Michel Barnier has already come out a few weeks ago rejecting major aspects of the Chequers deal and the proposal. So, May's customs arrangement. He's also questioned the common rule book on a few times, saying actually, this idea of regulatory harmonisation with goods should be extended to services, that sort of thing. And also actually now that May has sort of kind of came out with this ultimatum, she's kind of saying, either accepts the Chequers proposal, this sort of already watered down Brexit, a lot of us think it is, so we're giving a lot of concessions to the EU, or we will go down the no-deal path. And I think the impression I'm getting from some European leaders, they don't want the no-deal scenario. So whether or not they're actually going to maybe reconsider some aspects of May's Chequers proposal, I guess we'll have to find out maybe in the summit in October or in the months to come.
Well, I guess to me, Chequers kind of looks like the worst of all worlds.
It is.
It's like taking all the rules with no say in it, and not having the ability to sort of make trade deals.
This is the problem. So, it's the common rule book that I'd really highlight, because of course it's basically taking all of the EU rules and legislation, into just taking it over, also having jurisdiction of the European Court, still then having say on those rules and those laws. And also I think it'll just upset a lot of people who voted Brexit in this country, especially small and medium-sized businesses, of course, who don't really see a lot of sense in the single market from their perspective, because, they do a lot of business maybe within the United Kingdom and may not necessarily be exporting or importing goods and services abroad, but then yet they have to accept 100% of single market rules and regulations and all the rest of it. So I think it'd be a massive disappointment for them. But then also, again, with Barnier actually, saying, well, actually, this common rule book should be extended to services as well, because, you may have an unfair competitive advantage now in services. So it does just go to show that, European allies and neighbours are fearful of how well our financial services and other sectors of our economy could do, not necessarily being tied down to a lot of these European rules and regulatory frameworks.
But do you think they're likely to stay in London if we get to the point of a no deal scenario?
Well, I know there's a lot of talks. Of course, there's been a lot of predictions. I know that in 2016 there's been figures saying that would do 75,000 jobs and things like that. And now I think they're saying it may be fewer than 5,000, things like that. And there are still, a lot of companies investing and stuff like that in our financial services.
Who's saying less than 5,000? That's optimistic.
I'm pretty sure it was on BBC News somewhere. I think it was the Lord Mayor or something like that, in London. I can't remember his name, but there was definitely a story out about that. Yeah, I think it was something like that. Or he said it may be between 5,000 to 15,000 or something like that, or around those figures of, jobs that may either be relocated or just lost in the process. But yeah, so I know financial services is a big one, and I know, of course, Europeans still want to have access to our financial markets, and we, of course, will still have access to their financial markets. So, trying to come to a deal would be the most sensible decision. But, of course, there's only so many concessions that we can give to the European Union, and of course with May now with this ultimatum whether to accept her proposals, which myself, a lot of Brexiteers actually don't agree with, and then of course, either just going down to the no deal path. And it seems like the government is starting to prepare for a no deal in some way or another, with some of the stories coming out now. But I guess we probably need some more concrete plans and evidence to suggest this.
How do you feel about the fact that the PM has kind of taken over negotiations from, like, it was kind of obvious that David Davis wasn't doing a massive amount, like whether that was out of his own unwillingness or sort of his own attitude to the job, or whether that's because he felt Theresa May was sort of trying to strong arm in, or whether Ollie Robbins was trying to like control what was going on behalf of the Prime Minister. But the Department for Brexit in the European Union was essentially created so that a Brexiteer could lead the process, and now we have the Prime Minister, who voted Remain, continues to refuse to say that she would vote Leave if she got another chance, is now conducting the negotiations. Do you think that's why you've ended up with such like a soft Brexit plan on the table?
Yeah, well, she promised herself that the negotiations would be led by a Brexiteer. She voted Remain. I know I did get a bit of reassurance that apparently the rumours that they were saying she was sort of a reluctant Remainer. So maybe, of course, at the time, maybe she was just standing with Cameron and his administration. But I think the problem is what's now happened, especially with David Davis resigning. Well, it kind of made clear to us, that months prior to the publication of the white paper and the announcement of the Chequers deal, that Davis and his department were actually getting sidelined. They didn't, this was being planned by the civil service and most likely Ollie Robbins months, prior to the actual, announcement of, bringing these ideas like common rule book, to the table. And now, of course, you've got Dominic Raab coming in, another Brexiteer, yes, but now May has now just, of course, announced, a couple of weeks ago, I'd say, that, she's going to take complete control of negotiations. And all that means is just giving more power and more negotiating authority to unelected civil servants like Ollie Robbins, rather than someone like Dominic Raab, who is, in fact, yes, a Brexiteer. So now it seems like it's just an entire sort of Remain contingent that is now just leading negotiations completely, and probably May herself, a Remainer, that just doesn't have the heart in it. She doesn't have the heart to carry out the Brexit that, 17.4 million people voted for.
I don't think 17.4 million people all voted for the same thing, but that's a point for another day. Now, what would you say to the kind of like Michael Gove argument of things, where he's essentially suggesting we should take what we can get now, and then I feel like the rationale is that if we end up with something along the lines of the Chequers deal, that it'll provide a stepping stone to go, look, we didn't Brexit enough, or we didn't like change enough, or we didn't get free enough from the European rule book or the European courts, and then you can go, look, now we're having to accept their laws with no say in it, surely we should just then like take another step and go for like a full Brexit sort of 5 years down the line.
Yeah, well, I do sort of understand Gove's logic to an extent. He's kind of sort of like, we should just get any sort of Brexit now, and then of course it can be reformed and amended in the years to come. But I think what a lot of us are really fearful of is that, of course, if we kind of get this Brexit now, and it's a bit of a fudge, of course, and it's not going to live up to the expectations of millions of people in this country, because of course it's not the actual Brexit they voted for, you could potentially see a future government being elected trying to drag us back in to the EU, or try and, reverse the Article 50 process, that's has now taken place. And the problem then I see with that is...
What do you mean by that? Has there been like actual legal sort of mechanisms put in place, or...
No,
it's just a suggestion.
It's just a suggestion. There's a lot of speculation that this could happen. But then, of course, my massive fear now would be, of course, public opinion maybe could sway the other way. Of course, if Brexit does not go the way they wanted, and then my fear would be is that then we'd be an even worse position than we were when we were in the EU. Because, of course, if we then decide to sort of join back the European Union, I think they would turn around and say, well, you're no longer going to be the awkward partner. We're no longer going to have this special relationship. You're going to have to sign up to everything. You're going to have to be a committed member, whether that's, Euro, Schengen. This is just my personal view, but I think they'd want us to commit to everything, because I think probably over the past few years, we probably have been causing them a bit of trouble, and they've always seen us the awkward partner, that kind of have special opt-ins and opt-outs and things like that. And I think this time, if we were gonna join back and wanted to join back, they'd want us to commit to the European project completely, like no other say.
Well, I've seen a couple of legal opinions drafted that would suggest that, say there was an act of Parliament passed that just said we nullify our triggering of Article 50, that essentially there's no recourse in place there, that essentially things would just have to revert to the way they were, because there's nothing written down in any European constitution or document that says what would happen if someone triggers Article 50 and then chooses to like reverse that decision. And quite a few European negotiators made it clear that if we said no, we kind of want to change our mind on this, that we'd end up that they would be happy enough to give us the same deal that we had sort of pre-referendum. Do you think that's kind of out of desperation to keep us in, or do you think that's out of like genuine sincerity, wanting Britain to be part of the European project?
I think it's trying to disrupt, because of course they know there may be a possibility, or they're trying to, of course, influence domestic politics in this country and public opinion. Because I think saying comments and statements like this, of course, it's not only just going to, of course, undermine the whole Brexit process itself and Theresa May's negotiating position, but it's also actually now going to fuel, of course, this sort of more, I think, vocal minority of this sort of Remain contingent, especially, the sort of people's vote.
I don't know if you can call it minority anymore. YouGov and Sky's data shows there's probably maybe between 40 and 50% of the country think we should have a second vote.
Well, this is the problem as well, and I think the polls are a little bit misleading because, of course, when they're asking members of the public what they think a second vote is, people have different ideas of what a second referendum or second vote would be. So some people, when they're getting asked, they would think, oh, is it a referendum or a vote on the Chequers deal or a no deal? And of course, a lot of people are thinking, oh, is it a vote on the Chequers deal or no deal or just Remain and things like that? So of course, there are Brexiteers who may have answered this poll thinking if there was a second vote, it may just be on these two options. So we're still going to get Brexit regardless, but it's just what form of Brexit. Is it going to be the hard Brexit, of course, that a lot of the Brexiteers desire, or is it going to be a more softer, watered down version that Theresa May's proposing? So I think we've got to be really careful when looking at these sort of YouGov and other polling organisations who conduct these polls. We don't know the demographics they're looking at.
Well, we can look it up in the.
Of course, yeah, of course. So you can have a look and see who is actually saying what. But I think also, I think the questions need to be clear. So of course, when you're asking what the second vote is, you should actually also be saying, in this hypothetical scenario, what the options would be on the ballot paper if we did have this second vote, because people have different ideas of what that could be.
I don't think a very slim majority asking for it is enough of a mandate. I have this crazy opinion that you can't just govern by the very tiniest of majorities. But so at the minute we're kind of in a bit of limbo chaos. We really don't know what's going to happen. We could end up remaining in the European Union, or we could be completely out of it in every way, shape and form. Absolutely, and every sort of scenario in between could happen. It's
of course
entertaining, but a little draining. But do you think that the current chaos could have kind of been avoided if we'd had someone that had a plan for when Leave won? Like, is this the Brexiteers' fault? Is this Cameron's fault for kind of maybe he was too arrogant to believe he could lose?
Yeah, well, this is the thing. I think it is partially Cameron's fault, because I think during the referendum, before the referendum, when of course the bill had got passed in Parliament to then actually be able to hold this referendum, I think there was rumours and speculations that there were civil servants and there was a part of civil service, trying to maybe work, coming to Cameron and saying, we actually might need a plan or a contingency plan, of course, if it is a Leave vote. And it seemed that Cameron was very clear that he didn't want any plans at all to maybe prepare for a Brexit scenario, because I think he was so arrogant and he was so sure of himself that he would win the Remain vote. I mean, yes, it might have been a narrow vote, he thought it would have been, but I think, he'd already won, a Scottish independence referendum vote a couple of years ago. He thought he could do the same. So, he 2 years ago, he sort of, more than 2 years ago now, but, he sort of, quietened down the Scottish nationalists' voice, and he was sort of hoping this referendum would then quiet down the Eurosceptic voice that is quite vocal in his party as well. I think also the problem is, of course, once Cameron resigns, we just got another Remain Prime Minister to take his place. So, I mean, personally, I originally would have been for someone like Andrea Leadsom or even Michael Gove, because, of course, I felt we needed a Brexiteer to be in charge, because they have the heart in it. They've passionately campaigned for it, and, they would want to put everything on the line to ensure that vote is delivered. So I don't think May has ever really believed in Brexit, or has ever actually, wanted to actually, she's sort of just been forced in a position where she has to do it because, of course, there was a referendum, and there was a legitimate democratic mandate, one of the biggest in this country's political history.
Yeah, I reject that. That's because of population growth, not because of any sort of like monstrous majority.
No, but there's still like, yeah, okay, but it's still one of the highest turnouts we've ever had in the history of elections.
Oh, yeah,
and things like
definitely.
that. So, it was over 70% of turnout. A lot of people, yes, of course, not all people didn't go out and vote for various reasons, but there was a large proportion of the population that did go out and vote, and whether that was for Leave or Remain, I think you cannot deny it's definitely one of the biggest democratic exercises we've had in this country.
Yeah, but we're not big on referendums, which I think is probably a good idea. It was good because referendums are tricky things to deal with. It's all about, but even just trying to figure out a way to put language on a ballot paper is tricky for me. Like, I feel like that's going to be the most difficult part for people who are trying to get a people's vote, is to figure out how they would put it on a ballot.
Yeah, and what options would they actually have? Because I think, with referendums, I think the maximum options you have is maybe 4 on the ballot paper or something like that. So, and also then you've probably got people within the people. So, of course, a lot of them will argue that people, and of course you've probably made the case, a lot of people on the Brexit side had different visions of what Brexit could be. I think there's a lot of people personally on the Remain side who may have different visions of what Remain could be.
Oh yeah, 100%. Because there'll be reluctant Remainers, like you sort of described, Theresa May, people who thought Europe was good but not perfect.
Yeah, so there'll be like
Jeremy Corbyn was like that as well.
Yeah, so there'll be soft Eurosceptics who, of course, don't like the EU per se, don't like its current form and structures, and of course want it to maybe try and reform it within, or just think it's probably sort of the best scenario right now, whether it's for our economy and just our place in the world and things like that. But then of course you have the more staunch Europhiles that of course actually love the European project. They want Britain to be more involved and more committed.
20-30%.
Yeah, I know, exactly. It's it is a minority in this country because we've always been generally historically Eurosceptic ever since we joined back in 73 and then voted to remain in 75. So yeah, it is clear, but I think, but then of course then you could start to look at, but then what do these people's vote want? Do they want a soft Remain or a hard, you could just sort of just turn the argument back on them when they of course sort of, these concepts of soft Leave and soft Brexit and hard Brexit have sort of come out. And also what I find funny is even before the referendum, I didn't, especially like the Liberal Democrats, for example, I didn't hear any of them being vocal about, but if Brexit does happen, we might have to have a vote on the deal. We might need to have a second vote, sort of, because I think one of the reasons was because they were so assured that they were going to win it. Like, a lot of people didn't predict this was going to happen. So of course they didn't make these arguments and cases until after the vote happened. They realised, God, we actually might be leaving. We might be leaving the European Union.
Ironically, it was a lot of the Brexiteers who were discussing it as a two-stage referendum. Dominic Cummings made the case sort of late 2015 that there should be 2 stages. And his reasoning was essentially that if you lay it out as like a 2-stage process, that you can make the case in the first round that to vote to remain is the risky option, because you could go, okay, say you would either have the choice to remain as we are or renegotiate the deal / leave. That would be like the 3 options. The remain as we are would be silly, because if we could get a better deal, then why the fuck not? Yeah. So their plan, just like brainstorming when they were trying to figure out how it was going to be conducted. Like, I don't know how seriously they took it, and it kind of disappeared once Boris mentioned it in the Commons, and David Cameron kind of shot the idea down, probably out of arrogance a little bit. Do you think we were right to trigger Article 50 when we did? Like, that was very, very clear early on that it kind of felt like a bit of a smash and grab. It was like, oh shit, we want, right, wait, get out, quick.
Yeah. Also, the problem was, because I know a lot of Brexiteers wanted, Article 50 to be triggered on the 24th, straight right after the referendum result, because that was never going to be possible, considering then we had a Prime Minister who resigned, and then we had to, form a new cabinet and form a new government, essentially. Yeah, so I think, the problem...
Do you think Cameron should have resigned?
No, personally not, but then I do... Because, the thing is, he kept...
Because he would have been...
Well, he kept claiming that, he would deliver the result no matter what. But I think actually a lot of us deep down knew that, he was going to resign, and he wasn't going to carry on with the process was something he doesn't believe in, and because that's what I understand that. So then I'm kind of thinking, so why is someone like Theresa May then coming in, who obviously doesn't believe in the process as well? So, and I think the problem was with the triggering of Article 50 is that the government was sort of panicking because, of course, you've got the likes of like Gina Miller doing all these court cases, challenging the government in the Supreme Court. Because,
to be fair, Gina Miller's court case was 110% fair. Like,
it was.
I feel like she got such a bad rap for that.
She did. And I think is,
she's been tipped as a new Lib Dem leader.
I know, I did see that actually. And the thing is, I agree. But the thing is, what frustrated me with her the most is you could clearly see what her intentions were. Because what she was trying to do was, she wasn't going into this court case because she believed in parliamentary democracy and this idea, that of course it should be decided by members of parliament. She was going in there because she was hoping that if she won this court case, then MPs would not vote to trigger Article 50. That was her goal, because she wanted to stop Brexit before we could even actually trigger and begin the process. So of course, the government then, of course, Theresa May came out and Andrew Marr and said, okay, we're going to be leaving at the end of March, in 2018. Sorry, we're going to trigger it in March 2017. And then, of course, the government had to then quickly get to that deadline that she promised by making sure all this court case get out of the way, to make sure that MPs vote on triggering Article 50, which they did. So, of course, it
overwhelmingly.
Yeah. So of course, I think
it would have been electoral suicide.
Oh, it would have, especially for a lot of those Labour and Conservative MPs, well, especially if they were in Leave constituencies as well. Yeah, I mean, especially of course, then this snap election was called anyway, then a lot of those MPs would be losing their seats, I think. But actually, I mean, the snap election might not have even been called if there was a triggering of Article 50. I don't know. Personally, I think it was a bit of a tactical error. I think she wavered on it. I think she considered doing it straight away, which she should have. It should have been like that. Yeah.
She should have been like, right, I'm a new Prime Minister, I need a mandate. The sort of hesitance and we're not going to do it, we're all just going to get on with the job and we're not going to, and then all of a sudden it appeared after her away 2 days in the countryside to think about it. And
yeah,
I think she kind of she was initially against it and then got convinced. And I think it's the same thing happened to Gordon Brown. And he was like flying high in the polls. He was doing amazing. Like, everyone forgets that Gordon Brown was like super popular for about 18 months.
It was before, I guess, midway through 2008, really, wasn't it? It was because there was still.
But it wasn't even, from what I can tell, it wasn't even the crash that did him, because he was dealing with that reasonably well from what like.
It was more of just his leadership personally, because
yeah, and he hesitated on, like, he was storming ahead in the polls, and then he hesitated and he ummed and he ahed, and then when he got to it, he was kind of like, it felt like he thought he had to do it, and then it was like a reluctant. And I feel like Theresa May had the same sort of feeling. And you got to do things with conviction, I think, to get anywhere. But we've got kind of sidetracked here. So, are we going to end up with Brexit in name only, or are we going to end up crashing out with no deal? Or, will there be some sort of last-minute agreement to extend the transition period?
I think personally, it's gonna get to the point a couple of months before the Article 50 process is legally finished. I think there will be definitely prospects of a no deal scenario, but then I can potentially see, whether it's the UK government or EU negotiators, maybe both sides are probably going to panic a bit. And I think you're right, there may be some sort of transitional period that's going to quickly be agreed. And then, of course, then it will kind of extend sort of the process for another 20 months or something like that to continue these negotiations. Because the problem is it could, with May's current Chequers proposal, it could be Brexit in name only, because we would still be accepting a lot of rules and regulations from the European Union. Then they would still have jurisdiction and say through European courts over those decisions. It also undermines one of the biggest, especially what I campaign on, one of the biggest arguments, of course, for leaving the European Union is the ability to sign and negotiate our own free trade deals outside of a customs union, outside of this trading bloc, and make those deals with the United States, with India, with Australia. And
why is a US trade deal more favourable than with Europe, given that we'd still have to take their rule book? Trump's been very clear on that. Why is it different to go to America and say, well, we're going to take your arguably lower quality products in some cases, especially if you're talking about like GM crops or like hormone-fed beef or
I know there's a Tory chicken.
I don't feel like that's the biggest problem. I just think people wouldn't buy that. Why is America better than Europe to have a free trade deal with?
Well, I think it's good having.
We already trade.
No,
like a third of the world through the EU.
We do, but I think the problem is with the European Union as well, and especially when you look at the customs union, it is a bit of an economic basket case, because there's this sort of illusion where the European Union is very for free and open trade and free market. So yes, that is very true within European member states and between European markets, but then when you start to look outside of that, it's not the case really. They kind of put up sort of the walls around the world. If you look at a lot of goods that come from like Africa, for example, have massive tariffs put on their agricultural goods trying to go into European markets, because of course the Europeans want to prioritize Spanish oranges and Italian tomatoes and that sort of French vegetables and stuff like that. So I think,
is that not kind of fair? Are you going to protect your own industry?
Well, yes and no. But I mean, you can protect your industries to a certain extent. But
like say we started taking beef from America and it started to become popular because it's a little bit cheaper and it starts to sort of displace some of the British farmers, and they start losing out on business. They start having to require either more subsidies from government, or they just go out of business altogether, and we potential to lose the pot, like our British farming industry. Do you not think there's a risk of that?
I think yes and no, because of course, as an independent country, if it kind of gets to that situation, and for example, as you're saying, it seems like the implication of US beef sort of dumping on our markets and things like that. As an independent country outside of the customs union, we would be able to unilaterally potentially put tariffs on those goods. So I mean,
you think that Trump, Mr. America First, would go for that?
I think yes or no. I think if it could be sort of the comparative advantage. Of course, if we have something to provide the United States, then of course it could be like
a tax haven, perhaps.
Maybe. But I mean, the point I was trying to sort of get at is that I feel like the European Union setup of trade is a bit hypocritical, because for example, with the United States right now, this is why Trump's been putting so much pressure on the EU. Because I mean, if you look at so the EU slapped 10% of tariffs on American cars, yet America only put 2.5% tariffs on European cars. And of course now Trump's saying, well, hang on, there's a bit of a trade deficit going on there. We want to make it fairer. So of course then he's now threatening to put higher tariffs on European cars. But then the European Union's kind of, going all up in arms, getting really frustrated and angry about it. But then at the same time, it's like, well, you've already got high tariffs on their goods. But then now they want to do the opposite, and you're upset about it. So you don't, and you're kind of saying, oh, this may cause a trade war. This is causing threats and on our economies and stuff like that. But you erect tariffs on loads of goods all around the world, and then of course when someone does it to you, you don't like it. I think it's quite hypocritical.
It's a little bit. But then, a tiny bit hypocritical.
They are. I know. The European Union is just going to be putting their economy's best interests first. But at the same time, I think then it will exploit other economies. I mean, I know there have been examples of when I was at university and had to do research on European trade. So one of the things, of course, while saying, there'll be for example, African coffee beans. If they're unroasted, so if they've processed at all, then Germany would put tariffs on those, roasted coffee beans. But if they're unroasted, then of course they're a lot cheaper. So then Germany then of course process them themselves and actually make quite a hefty profit. And actually it's sort of seen as maybe exploiting some of these African countries. But at the same time, they put these tariffs on, their goods. But then also they'll dump, whether it's frozen chicken or tinned tomatoes on their markets, which of course is destroying African farming industry and local business like that. So I mean, as you said, of course, you made the example, that could be applied maybe to our British farming industry and stuff like that. But I think being an independent sovereign country will then have, the unilateral right to protect those industries in the way we can if we wanted to. But right now, because we're stuck in a customs union, we have to agree with 27 other countries who have different economic preferences and different economic needs for their industries and, may want preference over one good or the other. We all have to agree the same tariffs, the same trading external policy, and I think it's just fair to say that, our economy may have different needs to the economies of Romania or Poland and Bulgaria. Just quite likely we might have this different economic needs to Italy and Spain and Portugal. So, I mean, I think it's fair to, if we want to come out of a customs union, to then unilaterally decide and dictate our own trade policy.
I would say that's what the video is for. But
it is, but I mean, but then exactly. But then, of course, you could be at stalemate for years to come with that sort of thing. I mean, this a lot of people talk about, it's great. Exactly, and a lot of people kind of talk, oh, it's great, how the EU have now got a free trade deal with Canada, and they recently have decided to formulate a concrete one with Japan, for example, like that. But it's just like how many years it's taking these countries to actually negotiate, because for example, I know the Canadian one took around 7 years because there was Romania kept vetoing because there was an issue with Romanian visas or something like that going into Canada, or there was something like that. Yeah,
Canada are pretty good for working.
No, they usually are. So I'm not sure what the actual.
So I went for a year.
Yeah, so I'm not sure what the problem was, but I don't. There was something. Romania wasn't happy about something, so they kept vetoing it, and then of course I think they finally came to the negotiating table. But I mean, I know there's been issues with the EU where they've been trying to negotiate with New Zealand and other countries like that. Of course, it's seen as maybe more logical having sort of a trading bloc, kind of trading like this and things like that. But the problem is you're putting together a lot of different size economies and rich and poor economies, all expecting to abide by the same trading standards and trading policy. I just don't think it works.
It's fair enough. It's a fair enough point to make. I'm not sure how much I agree, but I'm not a trade expert, so like I can't claim to have
No, of course, no. I mean, this is just from previous research and reading I've done. So.
So at the moment, I'm heading to the IEA when we finish up here, and they put out their paper about why Britain should prepare for no deal, why it's essentially a clean break could be the next best option for Britain. Do you think it'd be worth the sort of panic and sort of madness that could well unfold if we get to March 2019 and there's nothing agreed, and all of a sudden people aren't sure if planes are going to take off or if borders are going to stay open, or if ships are going to be allowed into port, and medicine they started
I think we need to be really careful about this, because I know there's been scaremongering stories. They'll say, for example, that there may be like military on the streets handing out rations and things like that.
I think that's
and I agree. So I mean, of course, the government may be having a contingency plan for that, but then the thing is, it's good to always plan for the worst case scenario, because then if you didn't, then of course you will have people from the Remain side saying, well, you didn't prepare for this. But I mean, I don't think that's going to happen. But I think
you can't be caught with that twice.
But I think we need to be really careful with the sort of because of course I think having a deal is more preferable than WTO, but we need to stop over exaggerating the sort of, I think, WTO terms and rules, because if we do go onto WTO rules, so we will be, as a full member of the WTO as well as the European Union, there are already regulatory frameworks and procedures and agreements in place for the standards of goods and services and things like that. So this idea that because we won't necessarily be accepting all these European rules anymore and things like that, trading will cease completely, or, the European Union may erect more, procedures and standards on our goods to discriminate them so they can't come through and things like that. There are ways around that. I mean, for example, I read an article in Brexit Central recently that, was talking about there's, of course, this Remainer fear that, the EU could multilaterally put, new standards or rules on our goods, but to discriminate them. But if the goods while we're still in the EU and trading with them, if the goods remain the same itself, whether it's labeling or standard of product and that sort of thing, and quality, if they all remain the same, then trading should proceed. There's going to be, of course, some holds-ups because with the custom checks and things like that, but the trading itself should still proceed regardless, because of course if the European Union tries and erects new rules, we could in our own right take them to WTO courts over disciplinary procedures and things like that. And actually, yes, of course, so it would delay trade for a while, but we would certainly win. And actually, it would show the European Union just all being spiteful, just trying to, and that's what a lot of people see these negotiations are anyway. They're just trying to punish us because they're fearful of this sort of domino effect. That once we leave and we look prosperous and, successful, other rising Eurosceptic stars like, Italy or, I guess sort of Hungary and Poland, these other countries may actually start to follow suit and actually may want to exit from the European Union itself, because we have seen over the years, especially since the financial crisis, and I mean even the migrant crisis and things like this, there has been a rise of Euroscepticism, of course, not just in this country but throughout Europe as well. Of course, a lot of these Eurosceptic parties haven't been as successful as they wanted to, if you look at France and the Netherlands, but then they have been very successful if you look at countries like Italy. So I think there is, and I think the European Union is frightened. It's terrified of populism. It doesn't know how to handle it. It doesn't know how to respond to it. So, of course, all that's going to happen is that populism is just going to continue to increase, while these European elites are still going to sort of churn out the same sort of liberal rhetoric that people just don't buy into anymore.
You used a quite interesting choice of words there, where you said that you wanted to remain with the same rules for trading with the EU. So what's the point in leaving if we're going to keep the same standards?
I mean, so this idea. There's a difference between sort of regulatory harmonisation and regulatory alignment, which of course has been mentioned by David Davis in the past when he was still Brexit Secretary. So regulatory harmonisation is then we literally absorb all of the rules, but the problem is because we're still absorbing all of the rules from the EU. So of course, then the jurisdiction of the European courts, and of course, actually the EU could still have say over new rules that then would have to apply to our economy and our economic sectors. Whereas, of course, the difference is you have regulatory alignment. So what we're doing anyway with the withdrawal bill is we're taking all of the EU rules and laws, and then we're transferring them over to UK statute law. So, of course, we're going through all these legislation. We're removing, the names of European institutions and things like that, and frameworks and agencies and all the rest of it. And then, of course, then if we wanted to, as a parliament, yes, it will take, of course, probably maybe years of procedures, but we can then start a process of deregulating if we wanted to, because that's what a lot of Brexiteers, were frustrated with the European Union. They thought a lot of it was over-regulating these industries, our industries, and making them less competitive, not just, economically, regionally with the European Union, but also globally as well.
Do you have any specific examples of the over-regulation?
So I guess, there's the classics. You look at the working time directive and things like that. And I know one issue, so I think I think there's issues with also the landfill directive as well, because I think there was an article a few weeks ago saying that actually now bin collections may now be every 3 weeks, rather than what usually at the moment it's like every 1 or 2 weeks and things like that. So now, does
that not seem pretty reasonable? You're trying to cut down waste. You're trying to get people to be more
trying to cut down waste. But but the problem is so of course I understand why they're doing it, because of course it's sort of they kind of have like these sort of green policies they're trying to implement, within these directives. But then the problem is as well is it's not just that simple, just to extend it an extra week and expect ordinary people. So it's a transition that would have to be taken over time. And I think what most people
it's not like we're jumping from 1 to 3 weeks.
No, but I mean I think what people are finding frustrating is that of course it's not the local authorities or these councils, even councillors or even MPs that they've elected. It's coming from rules from a European Commission that sort of sets the agenda, and it sort of then trickles down to, yes, a democratic parliament, and then of course a council of ministers. But then throughout the whole legislative process, there's only one democratic body that has decision making. The rest of them have never been voted in, cannot be voted out. They are essentially by definition unaccountable to not just the British electorate, but European electorates across the EU.
Well, that is a great place to leave it. Yeah. What's the petition that's going to Downing Street?
Oh yeah, so
if you want to talk about that.
Oh, of course, yeah. No, so we did it yesterday actually. So we've written a letter to Theresa May because we did send one last month and we didn't really get a response. So this time we decided that she'd go down to 10 Downing Street and deliver it in person. So basically, it's just telling her that a lot of the supporters, a lot of emails and messages we've been getting from our supporters who are frustrated with the Chequers deal, and they don't see it as a Brexit or Brexit they voted for. It's very watered down. So of course we've written to her, kind of urging her to take a more stronger stance with the EU, and actually, massively sort of reform this Chequers proposal, or actually change large aspects of it, or actually prepare for a no deal. Because I know, we've even mentioned that of course there was a Conservative home poll just last week that was saying, I think it was now up to out of the Conservative members that were polled, I think 45% of them, so the majority, now want Theresa May to go. So it's not just grassroots up and down the country. So of course we get messages from Labour voters, because we are a cross-party campaign. So we do get messages and emails from people from both sides. But it does also show that it's not just the British grassroots or a lot of British public that are upset. It's also actually the Conservatives themselves are upset with their leader and the way she's proceeded with this. And of course, we just talked about the fact that she's she's been sidelining Brexiteers. The fact that she's a Remainer. You clearly don't have the heart in it. So if you don't have the heart in it, how about step aside or step down, and maybe like someone like Boris Johnson should take charge.
Right. Well, that's a note to leave it on. Yeah, thanks very much for chatting to us.
Yeah, thank you. It's been nice talking to you.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to subscribe to us on iTunes or on Spotify, follow us on Facebook or Twitter, and generally just spread the word. Until next time, thanks for listening.
Man-made climate change is a lie, or it's a hoax invented by the Chinese, or whatever people want to say. But actually,
What sort of idiot says that?